My name is Daniel Brooks, 33 years old, and the quiet middle hinge in a door that never seemed to swing my way. In our town, the Brooks name sits on the side of every delivery truck and hangs in stamped steel over the river like an iron signature. People like to say my mother built that bridge with her bare hands after my father died. Grief poured into molten metal and cooled into profit. They aren't far off. She took a factory on the brink and turned it into Brooks Precision, a crown jewel of American manufacturing, the kind of place that still smells faintly of oil and hot metal even in the executive wing. I grew up measuring myself against that hum. When I was small, she'd take me to the plant on Saturday mornings and let me stand on a milk crate to watch the presses bite down. The machines moved with a certainty I envied. My mother did too. In her world, tolerances were everything. The thickness of a gasket, the timing of a punch, the grief allotted to a widow before she sharpened into a CO. There was a right thickness for every feeling. Mine always seemed a hair off. After my father's funeral, people stopped calling her Elaine and started calling her Mrs. Brooks, the way you address a ship. She accepted condolences with one hand and vendors' terms with the other. She never remarried. She didn't need to. The company was spouse enough, demanding, possessive, and reliably there at 3 in the morning when the numbers wouldn't reconcile. I wasn't the disappointment. That would imply I'd been considered for something and fallen short. I was the reliable middle gear, useful but unglorified. Julia, my older sister, shadowed our mother through mergers and plant expansions like a diamond-tipped stylus, inscribing her name into board minutes. Evan, our younger brother, learned how to make his life look expensive from every angle and never met a camera he didn't love. Between their spotlight and his skylight, there wasn't much left for me but the aisles between racks, the conversations with foremen, the way a machine sounds when it's a week from failing. I earned a degree in industrial engineering and came home speaking in efficiencies and predictive maintenance. My mother listened the way you humor a child describing a fort. Good thinking, she'd say, already signing something more important. Later, she'd remind me that leadership isn't a proposal, it's a verdict. The jury, in our family, had returned long ago. Julia was the heir by deliberation and echo. I was a dependable footnote. People assume sons hunger for their father's approval. Maybe that's easier. The shape of a father's pride is familiar. A mother's pride, when she's had to become steel to survive, is something else, rarer, colder, traded like currency in rooms where you earn it once and then guard it like oxygen. I wanted that smile of hers, the one that made suppliers blink first. I wanted it and stopped admitting it. Brooks' Precision kept growing. So did the distance between the office with the river view and the desk where I sat with maintenance reports. On paper, I was integral. In practice, I was invisible in a way only family can manage. I told myself it was fine. Machines don't sulk, they run. I learned to do the same, quietly cataloging the places where this empire shone and the hairline fractures that everyone else was too dazzled to see. Julia learned to walk in heels on the catwalk above line 3, the one with the safety grating that sings when you cross it. She was 12 and already wearing our mother's posture like a borrowed crown, chin up, eyes taking inventory. The foreman called her Miss Brooks with a respect that was part prediction, part surrender. She never flinched at the press thunder, never smelled the oil. She smelled opportunity. By high school, she could read a P&L like sheet music and tell you which bar the off-key note lived in. Our mother did not hide her delight. Watching them move together through the plant was like seeing a blueprint laid over a building, intention snapping onto reality. Promotion, for Julia, was never a question so much as a schedule. She collected mentors the way other girls collected bracelets. Mergers and acquisitions became her second language before she could legally sign a contract. She sat in on vendor renegotiations and smiled that exact smile our mother uses right before the price drops. When she laughed, men who had outlasted 3 recessions laughed too, hoping proximity might be a form of tenure. I caught her sometimes tracing a finger along the brass plaque outside the boardroom, measuring where her name would fit. It wasn't vanity. It was calibration. Evan arrived in the world with better lighting. Some people carry weather. He carried a backdrop. The factory made him sneeze, so he learned to visit only on days when the PR team came through, drifting against a railing in a perfectly wrinkled shirt while a camera found him. He was gifted, but not in a way the ledger could weigh. He understood angles, impressions, the currency of attention. Our mother said he'd grow out of it. He grew bigger into it. By 25, he could turn a breakfast into content and a handshake into a sponsorship. When his posts featured the Brooks logo, inquiries ticked up for a day. Then the line flattened, and he flew somewhere warmer to keep the curve of his life from doing the same. At dinners, Julia and our mother talked in nouns with teeth, margins, tooling, arbitration. Evan sprinkled adjectives like confetti, insane, iconic, unreal. I poured coffee and listened, because listening is what you do when you're the part of the machine that isn't chromed. Julia asked me once what I thought of a debt restructure. Before I could finish my sentence, her phone lit up with a banker's name, and the question folded itself away in her pocket. People love a story that assigns roles neatly. The golden child who earns it, the beautiful one who floats, the middle one who minds the shop. It isn't wrong, exactly. It just leaves out the drag coefficient, the cost of being near a gravity so certain it bends your path. I don't begrudge Julia her orbit. She has the burn for it, the heat that keeps engines from stalling. And Evan, for all his gloss, can make strangers feel like they've known him since grade school. There's leverage in that, even if it can't hold a crane. Still, in quiet moments, I catalog the handoffs I never got. The way our mother's gaze lands and lifts. The invisible tally she keeps. Julia gets the keys on a lanyard that never tangles. Evan gets the spare set stamped with a hashtag. I keep a notebook of sounds, the stutter in a gearbox, the whine before a bearing quits, because some inheritances aren't given. They're overheard. The day of the pitch, the boardroom smelled like lemon polish and old victories. 12 chairs, high-backed and carnivorous, waited around a table big enough to land a small plane. I had spent 3 months building the model, predictive maintenance layered over. Real-time throughput analytics, a nervous system for the factory that could feel a bearing heat up 3 days before it screamed. I wore the suit my mother's assistant said made me look credible. I took it as encouragement and not camouflage. They filed in like weather fronts. Mr. Hahn with his thundercloud eyebrows, the McCready twins with their synchronized nods, Julia already flipping through my deck, lips pressed into a useful line. My mother came last, as always, carrying her presence the way some people carry a briefcase, purposeful, heavy, never set down. "Let's keep this tight," she said, the way surgeons say. "Scalpel." I started with the data because numbers don't stutter. Downtime hours, energy waste, the cost of waiting until something fails versus knowing when it will. The model lit up the screen with clean lines and saving projections that made sense even if you didn't know the vocabulary. I showed them where the presses lost their rhythm after midnight shifts, how a new scheduling algorithm could smooth the heartbeat. I talked about sensors the size of bottle caps and software that would turn our guessing into prediction. I was 2 slides from the demo when my mother set her pen down. It made a sound like a gavel. "Daniel," she said, and the room aligned around my name. "We appreciate the enthusiasm." The ellipsis did more damage than the word. She turned to the board, palms open, someone generous with someone else's time. "This is precisely the kind of academic solution vendors love to sell when they've never run steel. Our clients buy reliability, not experiments." A few chuckles found purchase, polite as napkins. I tried to smile, as if we were collaborating on the same joke. "It's not experimental," I said, steadying my voice. "Pilot tests in Bay 2 show." She held up a hand, that simple faucet motion that shuts a person off. "I've seen enough." To the board. "We can revisit sensors when we're done with the union talks and the St. Louis expansion. One change at a time." I looked to Julia, hoping for a bridge. She was tracing a number on the spreadsheet, like a finger over a scar. "Maybe in Q4, she offered, aiming for mercy and landing on postponement. Evan, invited for optics, was composing his face into something supportive, a mirror adjusting to the room's light. I closed the laptop slowly because slamming it would have been the wrong music. The projector went black, the way a stage does when the lead is mistaken for a prop. My mother gave me the smile she reserves for suppliers, asking for net 30. "Good work, Daniel," she said, which in our dialect means, "not for us. Let's move on to the real business." The minutes recorded the decision succinctly. Later, people slapped my shoulder like I'd almost cleared a bar the height of a roof. In the hallway, The hum of the factory bled through the walls, something alive, regular, indifferent. Machines don't embarrass you. People do. I rode the elevator down with my demo sealed in its briefcase, feeling every floor click past like a ratchet that only turns one way. I left on a Tuesday because Tuesdays don't ask questions. The river was the same dull steel as the sign that bore our name, the morning shift already swallowing coffee and clocking in while the sky decided what kind of day to be. I parked on the far side of the lot where the asphalt buckles, where you can see the whole plant breathe, intake trucks like lungs, exhaust stacks like exclamation points that forgot what they were shouting about. In my pocket, my badge felt heavier than its plastic deserved, a small square of permission I no longer wanted to carry. Inside, the corridors smelled like solvent and lemon, the factory's cologne and the boardrooms married in the air. I took the long way to HR, past Bay 2 where my pilot sensors once blinked like patient fireflies before the darkness came for them. Lou at the tool crib lifted his chin. "Morning, Danny." "Morning, Lou." The words were a habit my mouth hadn't told my heart about. I looked at his hands, nicked and stained with work that never makes a press release, and tried not to make a speech no one had asked for. HR was beige and efficient, sympathy laminated. The receptionist slid a form across the counter like a coaster. "Exit interview?" she said, the way you might ask if I wanted a receipt. I checked the box that said no. I didn't owe the company a narrative any more than it had owed me a future. I placed my badge on the desk. It made no sound, but I felt something unhook. On the way out, I stopped on the catwalk above line 3. The grating hummed under me, the same note it had hummed under Julia's heels years ago. Press, retract, advance. The timing was perfect today. It always is once you decide to leave. I wanted to take a souvenir that wasn't theft. A smell, a sound, a vibration my bones could keep. The presses offered them all, indifferent and generous. I took the whole cord. My mother's office door was closed. A slice of her voice leaked through, clipped and metallic, negotiating something larger than my departure. I stood there long enough to feel stupid, then wrote a note on a yellow pad I stole from myself. "Thank you for everything you built. I'll be building too. D." I didn't sign my full name. Maybe pettiness, maybe privacy. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd recognize the handwriting without the sun attached. The apartment took 30 minutes to empty because it had never been full. A suitcase, a toolbox, the notebook where I kept the sounds of failing machines. I left the framed degree on the wall because the nail fitted better than my future did. Evan texted a link to a rooftop party that night, a spray of fireworks frozen on the thumbnail, no caption. Julia sent a calendar invitation for the quarterly ops review next week, with a question mark. I declined both. At the bus station the air tasted like diesel and decisions. I bought a one-way ticket west with money saved in a jar labeled vacation, because naming things incorrectly is sometimes a plan. When the coach pulled in, its brakes sighed, like an old man giving up on an argument. I took a window seat and watched the factory fall behind, the sign shrink until it was a comma in a sentence I wasn't going to finish. I didn't pray. I counted. Miles, dollars, ideas. I counted the ways you could turn not being chosen into a tool. The vow wasn't dramatic, not even verbal. It settled into me quiet and exact, a tolerance I could hold the rest of my life. I would succeed where no one was watching, so that one day they'd have to. Machines don't need witnesses to be true. Neither did I. The first thing I bought in the new city was a hardware store named Tag. The kind you slide paper into and pin above your heart as if identity were a shift you could clock in for. I wrote, David, in block letters because curves felt indulgent, and Stone underneath because it sounded like something you could build on, and also something no one looks twice at. Daniel Brooks carried history like an uncashed check. David Stone could pay cash and keep walking. I rented a studio that had once been a storage closet behind a bakery. In the mornings, the walls breathed cinnamon and yeast, and by afternoon, they cooled into concrete and quiet. I set a folding table by the single window and made an office out of air and resolve. My toolbox went under the bed. My notebook lived on the table, open to a page of strange music, belt slap, bearing wine, motor sag. A metronome for starting over. Work came the way water comes when you loosen the right valve. I answered ads that didn't care about last names, graveyard maintenance at a plastics plant, a retrofit job for a municipal pump station, a temp contract no one wanted because the line never slept and the pay pretended it did. I took them all. I learned the layout of every city by its service entrances. On site, I was quiet and competent and unremarkable. The supervisors liked that. They didn't want a story. They wanted uptime. I stopped correcting people when they called me Dave. Dave owns a toolbox, not a lineage. Dave can eat his sandwich on an overturned crate and memorize the way a machine falters before the lights flicker. I saved cash in envelopes labeled after the things I didn't yet possess: office, pilot, sensor kit, lawyer. I lived on coffee and the stubborn idea that a person could be born twice, if the second time he did the naming himself. At night I built code that listened to cheap sensors like they were stethoscopes. A dashboard so clean a foreman could read it with grease under his nails. Algorithms that learned in the background without making a show of it. I rented server space by the month the way some people rent tuxedos. I called the company Stonework in my filings because I couldn't resist the small joke. The logo was a rectangle and my phone number. When salesmen found me, they tried to sell the dream of scale. I wasn't dreaming. I was calibrating. One plant, then two. A pilot at a bakery's packaging line where motors died on Thursdays because the operator favored that day for shortcuts. A municipal contract that didn't pay on time but introduced me to a city engineer who introduced me to a friend at a bottling facility with a problem that sounded like an echo of Bay 2 back home. I kept my voice level when the past thumped in my ribs. Sometimes I caught myself rehearsing the story I would not tell, the name I was not using, the boardroom that had gone silent like a machine whose breaker you pulled. Then I'd close the window on it and return to the work. Anonymity, I discovered, is a generous foreman. It lets you make mistakes in small rooms and correct them before anyone knows what you were trying to build. The first check with more zeros than my apartment had outlets cleared on a Tuesday. I didn't celebrate. I bought a second folding table and a better chair. I ordered a box of sensors, 50 at a discount, and sat on the floor cataloging their tiny hearts. David Stone had clients who signed forms without asking where he came from. Daniel Brooks watched from the other side of the glass and learned to be quiet. Some inheritances you slip off, like a ring that never quite fit. Some names you put on like safety glasses. I wore mine until the edges seated and the world came into focus. The wind didn't arrive with trumpets. It showed up as a spreadsheet that refused to be ordinary. A regional distributor had hired me to quiet their chaos. 6 warehouses, a fleet that kept missing its own shadow, orders that wandered through the system like tourists without a map. They'd burned through consultants, who left behind flowcharts and invoices. I asked for raw data and a stool near the loading dock. For 3 weeks, I lived on coffee and fluorescent light. I watched pallets drift into the wrong lanes, forklifts break too late because the pick lists were printed too early, drivers idle while the system insisted they were already gone. The software they used reported history like a historian in love with himself. It had no sense of tomorrow. I built a nerve ending for the operation, a way for scanners and GPS pings and door sensors to talk to each other without waiting for a manager to play interpreter. At night the bakery walls in my apartment swelled with warm breath, and I coded with the window open, letting the city's noise mix with the hum of my borrowed server. I bolted my old plant heartbeat to a logistic skeleton, predictive maintenance logic repurposed for trucks and aisles. The platform learned the shape of the day. When a dock got congested at 2 p.m., which pickers shaved 30 seconds per item, but lost 5 minutes every hour looking for labels that never printed, which driver's route looked clean on paper but tangled in reality because a school zone bled into rush hour like a slow leak. I called the prototype Atlas because it carried more than it should. The dashboard was less art than instrument panel, numbers and dials that meant something even to the men whose hands were too cracked for gestures. We rolled it out on a Monday, because failure is honest on Mondays. By Wednesday, detention fees had dipped. By Friday, a warehouse manager who treated me like a vending machine that sometimes delivered said, without theatrics, "It's different." The first miracle was small. A truck left on time that had never left on time. The second stacked on it. 3 fewer miles per route, then 7. Atlas started guessing correctly. If door 4 jammed, reroute to 6 and trigger a pick wave 2 minutes early to keep the belt fed. The system wasn't brilliant. It was attentive. Machines don't need flattery. They need listening. The irony wasn't lost on me. The brain I tried to graft onto our factory back home now pulsed under a different roof, moving boxes instead of dies, but beating the same rhythm I'd promised them years ago. I pictured my mother's hand, palm up to silence, then turned back to the graft that was climbing at the right angle, and let the memory pass, like a truck I didn't need to flag down. When the savings report landed, fuel down 9%, on-time performance up 12%, customer complaints halved, the distributor CFO asked if we could scale to the remaining facilities. I said yes because the work was done, and because I needed the revenue to be louder than nostalgia. The check cleared with enough zeros to convert envelopes into accounts and Stonework into a company with employees who didn't have to sit on folding chairs. I bought them real desks and a coffee machine that didn't groan. We moved into an office with windows on purpose. Atlas got a version number, and then another. The phone started ringing with problems I wanted: messy, physical, solvable. Somewhere in a different city, a boardroom's projector went dark long ago. Mine glowed over a map that learned in real time, and the hum in my chest finally matched the one on the screen. Growth, once it has a taste for itself, becomes a careful hunger. By the time Stonework held stakes in 3 suppliers, a distributor, and a maintenance firm that billed Brooks monthly, I could feel the pulse of their operation without stepping inside the plant. If Julia tugged on a contract, I saw the ripple in my numbers. If a press in Bay 3 ate more fasteners than normal, our reorder flagged me from 600 miles away. Control is a blunt word. I preferred feel. I was building a hand that could close when it needed to, and open if the future asked nicely. We called it the Harbor Proposal because harbors are built for weather you don't announce. 40 pages, plain type, no swagger. An offer to wire in our software, modernize their maintenance, rework supplier terms we already control from the shadows, and keep the Brooks name on the building like a flag no one had to lower. It came from a boutique advisory firm 3 layers removed from me, the kind that wears good suits and never leaves fingerprints. My name didn't appear. Stonework lived behind an LLC with a vowel soup title that could have been a dentist. I wrote the executive summary the way you write instructions for a life raft: simple, unsentimental, accurate. We laid out the rot without dramatics, downtime that bred in dark corners, cash frozen in inventory like winter inside a pipe, customers whose patience had a date. Then the cure, priced fairly, staged gently, with an earnout generous enough to taste like respect. We even built in a ceremonial role for the current leadership. Chairman Emeritus, oaths sworn to the past, while the future quietly rearranged the furniture. It landed on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays don't wake the neighbors. The banker sent me a timestamp and a terse delivered. I waited the way you wait for a kettle in a quiet kitchen, hearing every other sound in the house, because you've assigned them meaning they don't possess. 2 days went by. We heard nothing. On day 3, my phone lit with a forwarded email from the banker. Declined. Not aligned with strategic priorities. No counter. No questions. 3 sentences pressed flat as sheet metal. It was signed by my mother's assistant. I told myself that was logistics, not verdict. I told myself to be patient, that real decisions take place behind closed doors after the first no has done its theater. I lasted until evening, then called the receptionist and asked for procurement under a name I'd used before. The hold music tried too hard to sound like confidence. When the line clicked, I heard Julia's voice, small from distance and large from memory, talking to someone else in the room. She said the word vendor, the way our mother says. Experiment. The next morning, a courier envelope showed up at our office, our copy of the proposal with a red received stamp on the first page and the rest of it still stapled virgin. The staple's legs were unbent and shy. The packet hadn't even been fanned. My team pretended not to watch me read paper I knew by heart. I put it back in the envelope as if I were putting a child to bed. In the factory of my head, a breaker tripped and the lights came back brighter. Anonymous had been, in its way, merciful. It gave them a chance to choose the medicine without tasting my name. They'd rejected the cure, not knowing the hand that held it. The sting was clean, because it was impersonal. Clean stings heal fast, dirty ones fester. That night, I walked by the river where freighters dressed the dark in red and green dots. I thought about my mother's open palm in the boardroom, the faucet turn that shuts off a person mid-sentence. I had given her a harbor, and she hadn't even looked for the waterline. Fine. If the door doesn't open to a knock, you stop knocking. You buy the hinges. I flew home on a plane that didn't need my last name. No logo on the tail, no bragging in the cabin, just leather that remembered you and a hum so even it made conversation optional. The charter broker called it light jet class, which sounded appropriately modest for crossing a continent, with the kind of paperwork you don't photocopy at a hotel business center. I spent the hours over cloud and desert reading the deal for the last time, running my finger down clauses like a machinist checking tolerance, feeling for burrs that weren't there. The wire instructions lived in my pocket like a warm secret. By the time we banked over the river, ownership was a matter of Tuesday signatures and oxygen. On the tarmac, a driver held a sign that said Stone, because there's safety in being exactly who you say you are when no one knows what it means. The car was black and quiet, newer than my memories, but not loud about it. We passed the plant on the way in. From the highway, the building looked smaller, the way a childhood house does when you're tall enough to touch the doorframe with your palm. The sign still threw its steel into the gray sky, unbothered by the math happening in a server 2 states away that would change whose name paid for its bulbs. I'd packed like someone who had learned the difference between money and noise. A suit that fit correctly. Shoes that could cross a factory floor without needing an apology. A watch the color of decisions. Nothing with a logo bigger than a thumbprint. Wealth wants to be seen. Leverage prefers a seat by the window. At the house, the wreath was already on the door, and the hedges had their November discipline. Inside smelled like citrus and old wood, and the kind of order that takes staff to maintain. My mother's hand on my shoulder was brief and accurate, a machinist's touch. "You made it," she said, and in our dialect that means, "be useful." Julia glanced up from a spreadsheet on her phone, a tiny frown smoothing when she placed me in the room's flow. Evan appeared with a camera's smile, and a sweater that had to be dry cleaned by someone with opinions. "Long flight?" my mother asked, already scanning a list that had more to do with tomorrow's menu than with me. "Smooth," I said. "Tailwinds." We did the inventory dance of families, who know each other's defaults. Julia reviewed a supplier contract aloud, as if the walls were consultants. Evan narrated the arrangement of candlesticks to an invisible audience. I helped the housekeeper carry in 3 cases of wine, and snapped open the cardboard like I belonged in either world. When my phone buzzed, I stepped into the mudroom and checked the message. Escrow confirmed, signatures queued, Tuesday 9 a.m. I stared at the washer's blinking lights until my face forgot to show anything. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and re-entered the house the way you walk into a plant when the line is running well, eyes open, hands empty, listening for the one note that doesn't fit. At dinner I would hear it. Tomorrow I would name it. Tonight I was a son with a suitcase and a straight tie, home for Thanksgiving, just like everyone expected and nothing like it at all. The guest room hadn't changed, except the bed seemed smaller, and the trophies on the shelf had yellowed into artifacts. Debate plaques with my name sharp, as if engraving could preserve relevance. The window still faced the river, and if I leaned, I could see the edge of the plant's roof line like a knuckle under skin. I set my suitcase on the trunk and listened to the house breathe. The whir of ducks, a distant drawer, my mother's heels mapping orders into the hardwood. Julia knocked without waiting. She always has the key to every room, actual or implied. She took me in with one sweep, suit still crisp, tie straight, a man who hadn't been bumped by his travel. "You look rested," she said, in a tone that filed the observation where it couldn't do damage. Her phone hovered, already angling between a spreadsheet and a text chain I wasn't supposed to know about. "Mom's thinking of pulling the trigger on the LaSalle contract. If they nick us on payment terms, it wrecks the St. Louis timeline. Thoughts?" I could have given her 12, all of them sharp enough to pierce a cost of capital argument. I could have told her LaSalle's credit rating had hairline fractures, and the distributor I owned would soften them if asked correctly. Instead, I said, "Watch the net 60. It'll breathe into net 90 before you notice." She nodded the way you nod at a weather report when you've already decided on the coat. She sat on the trunk beside my case like it belonged to her, because in most narratives it does. "You still consulting for that Logistics thing? The pause was a microscope slide, the word held up for inspection. Stonework, I said. She smiled mildly. Right. Still small? I let my expression do nothing. Small works, I said. Her eyes moved to the wall, where a photo of us 3 kids at the plant opening lived under glass. She stood with that easy transfer of weight that means a meeting is now in a different room. Dinner at 7. Wear something that doesn't shed. She left me with the faint smell of her perfume and the cool of displaced air. Evan arrived 10 minutes later with a camera in his hand instead of a greeting. He framed me into shot and then performed surprise. Look at you, Mr. West Coast. Did you Uber from the airport or have they invented teleportation where you live? He wore a sweater that had never known lint and an expression that had. His hug was light and expertly timed for the click. Still doing the videos? I asked. He brightened, practiced and genuine at once. Brand pivot. Less lifestyle, more legacy. People love a family business arc. You should come on the pod. We'll do a brothers of industry thing. I'll send talking points so you don't, engineer the vibe. He glanced at my watch like it was an appointment he had to attend later. You staying long? Before I could answer, he added, Mom needs me to MC tomorrow's gratitude thing. You know how she gets. The dismissal came wrapped in inclusion. He had a talent for that. I told him I'd be around. He winked, already walking. Good. Bring your mysterious, minimalist energy. When the door closed, the room returned to its old dimensions. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the house's familiar noises sort themselves into categories. Julia still measured respect in deliverables. Evan still measured reality in engagement. Both of them saw me as useful in the way a level is useful, handy to have around, stored in a drawer you rarely open. They weren't wrong enough to argue with. They just weren't right. Downstairs, crystal touched crystal, and the silver made a careful, expensive sound. I washed my hands in the bathroom that knew my face from every stage it has worn, and the mirror gave me the same question it always gives. What, exactly, are you here to fix? I straightened my tie. Underestimation has a half-life, but it's also a power source if you wire it correctly. I smiled until it looked unintentional and went to dinner. Thanksgiving in our house is theater with better cutlery. The table was set like a contract. Crystal clauses, silver stipulations, candles burning down the timeline. The turkey gleamed under the chandelier as if it had been polished, and the centerpiece looked like it came with its own non-disclosure. Staff drifted the way good stagehands do, invisible until you need them. We did the ritual inventory of gratitude. Evan went first, because he knows where the camera is even when there isn't one. He thanked community and partnerships and a shoe brand by name. Julia followed with numbers that behave, market headwinds, a supplier she'd bent into a friend. When it was my turn, I said I was grateful for work that listens. It sounded small in that room, which was fine. Small is often accurate. My mother set down her wineglass, and the air calibrated. She didn't stand. She never needs to. Authority is a posture you're born into once and learn to use every day after. I have an announcement, she said. The room changed angles around her voice. You know what this company has cost and given, she began, the familiar preface to stories that end in triumph. I built Brooks Precision because I had to. I kept it because I chose to. And now, the right thing, the necessary thing, is to let it evolve. Julia went very still, the way a hunter does when the woods talk. Evan checked no phone and somehow still checked a phone. I'm selling, my mother said. No adornment. We close next week. The silver trembled a fraction and then remembered itself. Julia found her voice first. To whom? On what terms? The questions were triage. Evan's smile slipped from public to private confusion. Selling as in gone? Selling as in a clean transaction with an excellent buyer, she said, and there it was, the decision already made, the door already shut. It protects the employees, strengthens the lines, keeps the name on the building for now. She looked down the table to make sure we heard the grace in that last part. For now. And us? Evan said, soft in the place where he keeps his reflection. What about the family? My mother folded her napkin precisely, then unfolded it again. Your father left me a company, not a trust. I used it to build a life for you. I am not bequeathing a dividend of inertia. There will be no inheritance from this sale." It was almost kind, the way she said it. A surgeon's gentleness when the cut still has to be deep. Julia's face didn't move, which is how you know it landed. "The foundation we discussed?" she asked. "Yes," my mother said. "A fund for technical education, women and trades, endowment sized. You'll be proud of it." Evan laughed once, a dry, surprised sound. "So we get a plaque." He wasn't built for sentences without adjectives. "I've given more than a plaque," Julia said, and the room cooled a degree. 10 years of my life. And I gave you a company that taught you how," my mother replied, not unkind. "No one is owed the rest." I cut a small square turkey because my hands needed a task. The gravy boat winked light across its curve, and I watched my face distort for a second into someone less composed. Around us, plates continued arriving with their careful choreography. From the kitchen, a timer chimed and was silenced. The house, trained to endure storms, did its job. "Change asks for clarity," my mother said. "I am being clear." Forks found ceramic. Wine found throats. Somewhere in the distance the river dragged its iron color toward the sea. I held my breath just long enough to feel the world tip, then let it out as if nothing had moved at all. The room had that post-announcement quiet, the kind that holds its breath to see what shape the dust will take. My mother lifted her glass, tasted, set it down with the precision of a machinist seating a bearing. Julia's eyes ran calculations I couldn't see. Evan tried to smile like the cameras were still on, and found his mouth didn't know how. I put my fork down. It sounded louder than the knife against Crystal had a minute ago. "There's one more piece you should hear," I said, "because if a breaker's going to trip you may as well be the one who flips it." My mother's gaze found me, and flattened into neutrality, the face she uses for auditors and storms. "Daniel," she said, a warning disguised as inquiry. "The buyer?" I said. "It's me." No poetry. Just the weight of a simple sentence laid on a polished table. The silence changed temperature. The candles clicked softly as if they, too, were adjusting to new air. Evan's laugh arrived late and brittle. "Good one," he said, looking around for a laugh track that didn't show. Julia didn't blink. She never wastes the motion. "Explain," she said. "Stonework capital," I said. "Through subsidiaries. We've already acquired 3 of your suppliers and a distributor. Atlas runs half your logistics without wearing a name tag you recognize. The proposal you declined last spring came from us. This is the same plan, without the courtesy." My mother's hand flattened her napkin, smoothing a crease that wasn't there. "You're telling me you've been circling?" she asked, the word selected like a tool. "Not circling," I said. "Building. Around you. Toward you." Evan shoved back from the table, so quickly his chair protested. "You stalked our family business, and you didn't tell us? You didn't tell me?" The last part came out wounded, a boy finding out the mirror doesn't love him back. "I sent you an anonymous offer meant to keep the name and the faces," I said, keeping my voice level. "It wasn't read." Julia's lips tightened by a millimeter, the only admission she'll ever make in public. "Walk me through control," she said, already living in the new math despite herself. "Board debt covenants. Escrow funded. Board approval contingent on signatures Tuesday at 9. Employees protected. You and Mom offered roles that won't break the machine." I looked at my mother. "Chairman Emerita, if you want it. No levers. A room with a view. That isn't a role," she said. "It's a museum." Her voice didn't rise, but the table felt it. "You come into my house, using my holiday, and declare you've purchased what I bled for? I came to tell you before the press release does," I said, "and to give you a chance to choose how you'll stand in it." Evan pointed at me like he was tagging me in a photo. "This is betrayal." Julia cut him off without looking. "It's strategy," she said, then to me colder. "And you should have had the courage to put your name on the first offer." "I did," I said. "You just didn't know it yet." My mother rose then, not abruptly, deliberately, the way the plant powers down for maintenance. "You always wanted my smile," she said, something like sorrow threaded through steel. "Not like this." "I wanted to be useful," I said. "This is what useful looks like when you lock the doors." For a long breath, we were four people suspended between a past that felt permanent and a future already printed. Somewhere a timer in the kitchen sang and was silenced. Outside, the river kept dragging itself forward, untroubled by our ownership of anything. My mother sat back down without speaking. Julia reached for her phone, then stopped. Evan stared at me like a lens he didn't know how to focus. The candles burned an inch lower. The announcement had been made twice. The feast cooled. We picked up our utensils because hands need somewhere to go when a life changes. He found me in the hallway by the study, where the old portraits practiced their disappointed looks. The house had thinned out. Staff vanished to the kitchen, Julia to a phone call that would not be logged as such, our mother into a silence that had its own furniture. Evan came in hot, the way a car does when the brakes are mostly faith. He shut the door behind him with a push that made the hinges announce themselves. "You?" he said, as if the pronoun were a charge. "You did this to us. To me. You slither in with your little shell companies and steal the ground and call it strategy. Do you have any idea what this does to my brand partnerships? To the story I've been telling about us?" There he was, the gravitational center of his universe. I let it pass. "Sit," I said. He didn't. He paced, the soles of his shoes whispering wealth to the rug. "You're jealous," he said, finding a familiar shelf for his anger. "Always have been. You couldn't stand that I made something without grease under my nails. So you torpedo the whole thing and call it noble." I set my phone on the desk and slid it toward him like a tool. "This isn't about indie," I said. "It's about arithmetic." The screen showed a spreadsheet that would look like a foreign language to his followers, and like a confession to anyone who understands cash. "Vendor accounts," I said. 3 of them. "Shells. All incorporated in states that enjoy the dark. Invoices for consulting and brand integration that never occurred. The money routes to an LLC whose articles list a manager named E. Carter. That would be you." He laughed too quickly. "Everyone does pass-throughs. Taxes exist." He leaned in to perform nonchalance and saw the second tab. IP logs. Login times. The private Wi-Fi name of his loft showing up like a signature. I watched the moment land on him, a bird mistaking glass for sky. He straightened. "You hacked me. I audited the company we're buying," I said. "The network logs are ours to read. This is theft, Evan. 300,000 over 18 months, in amount small enough to look like dust until you sweep the floor." His mouth made a shape that wasn't a word. Then he found one. "I was owed," he said, softer, angrier. "Do you know how much visibility I brought? How many eyeballs? Mom doesn't even consider that revenue. Julia treats it like glitter. I covered client dinners when accounting misplaced my reimbursements. You don't fix a broken invoice system by creating a siphon," I said. "You come to me. You come to her. You don't build fake vendors named after street signs near your apartment." Color rose under his tan like rust waking up. "What are you going to do, big brother? Call the cops? Ruin the family brand?" He tried to make it sound like a dare, and it landed like a plea. "I'm going to give you a choice," I said. "Repay it. Quietly. Sign a separation agreement. Take 6 months. Get help if gambling's what I think it is. After that, if you want a place, you earn one where the numbers equal the adjectives." He stared at the phone, which had the indecency to glow. "You'd bury me." "I'm trying not to," I said. "Don't hand me the shovel." For a long moment, only the old clock spoke. Evan's shoulders folded a degree, and the performance drained out of him, leaving a person I hadn't met often. "I can pay back half," he said. "Soon." "All," I said. "Overtime is fine. But all." He nodded once, a jerky, almost adolescent motion. "You always thought machines were more honest than people," he said, a last flicker of defiance. "They are," I said. "But people can learn." He opened the door and left before I could tell him that was an invitation, not a verdict. The hinge didn't complain this time. She waited until the house exhaled. After Evan's door clicked and our mother's study went quiet, Julia knocked once and let herself in, carrying a legal pad like a flag of truce. She took the chair by the window where you can see the river and half the plant roof, and angled it so the streetlight cut her face into strategy and shadow. Anger's for people without options, she said, as if to herself. I prefer options. She set the pad on her knee and uncapped a pin. Congratulations would be performative, so let's not. You bought the machine. Now you need someone who knows which bolts shear under political torque. I poured water because it's hard to talk and drink at the same time. Go on. I'm not here for a plaque. The pen tapped once, a metronome. You don't want our mother in operations. She'll consult and undermine in the same sentence. Evan's an asset only at a distance. That leaves me. I know the vendor personalities, the union currents, which foremen have long memories, and which ones will follow a better forecast if you give them ownership on paper. She glanced at the legal pad. And I can read your Atlas dashboards without a translator. You're offering what, precisely? A contained battlefield with a measurable victory. The smile was small. I recognized it from rooms where numbers change hands. Give me the enterprise division. Legacy lines. I'll hit your KPI stack, downtime, on-time delivery, working capital unglued from inventory. I want authority commensurate with outcomes, not slogans. Title is negotiable, compensation not insultingly so, and a lane wide enough to matter. You had that lane, I said. You were running in it when the wall moved. The wall moved because you pushed it, she said without heat. Respect. She leaned forward. But your map is clean. The city isn't. You'll need someone who can walk through a plant at midnight and get a maintenance team to change a habit they've had for 15 years without filing a grievance about dignity. You don't bribe that with stock. You earn it with fluency. Terms, I said. She was ready. 18 months. A bonus ladder tied to real numbers. 3 hires of my choosing. No public second-guessing. If I miss, I resign without noise. If I hit, we revisit equity. Equity isn't a souvenir, I said. It's a promise to the future, she replied. You taught me that tonight whether you meant to or not. We sat in the soft machinery of the house, pipes ticking as they cooled, the old clock correcting itself in tiny clicks. I tried to picture Julia outside the gravity of our mother's approval, and found an outline that looked sharper than I expected. She had always wanted a helm. Maybe what she wanted was water that pushed back. You'll report to the integration COO, I said finally. You'll own the metrics you just named. Your authority stops at the edge of the numbers and starts again where you earn it. No side channels to mom. No speeches in rooms I'm not in. She considered the constraints like a locksmith facing a new lock. Deal, she said. No flinch, no drama. Just that. One more thing, I added. You sign a disclosure. Every off-book handshake dies in daylight. That's not disclosure, she said, almost smiling. That's culture. She stood, smoothed her skirt, capped her pen with the satisfaction of a box checked. At the doorway she paused. You were always better at machines, she said. Turns out you learn people, too. Only enough to know they break in quieter ways, I said. She nodded, not unkind. Then let's build something that doesn't. And she was gone, leaving the river and the roofline and a draft that felt, for the first time tonight, like weather I could work in. She called me to the study the way you'd call a machine offline, quietly, decisively, with the confidence that everything else could keep running without it for a while. The room smelled like old leather and scotch, the river pressing its iron hush against the windows. She didn't sit behind the desk. She stood at the mantel, a general without the map, one hand on the cool marble as if temperature were a fact she could still control. I raised you to be useful, she said, not turning. I did not expect you to be invisible while you learned how. I wasn't invisible, I said. You just weren't looking where I stood. She faced me then, the years arranged neatly on her features, like medals no one sees up close. You want an apology? This is the closest you'll get. I underestimated you. I mistook silence for absence and competence for compliance. That's on me. The words were clean, no garnish. And now you've crossed a line. Which one? I asked, because lines in this family reproduce like filings around a magnet. The one where family business becomes business against family, she said. You made me a spectator in my own house. You purchased the hallway we're standing in, And you did it in a way that teaches everyone watching what power looks like when it doesn't need to ask. I sent you a hand before I closed a fist. You sent me a courier envelope, she said. I didn't open it. That's my failure. But the closing hand is yours. She poured 2 fingers of scotch and let mine sit untouched on the desk between us. You think I don't recognize the move? I have done versions of it to men who wanted to pat my head and sell my inventory back to me at a markup. I called it survival and later strategy. It is both. It also leaves marks. I left you a chair, I said. With a view. A museum placard, she said. I'm not done being steel just because you decided the bridge is yours. We stood in the soft mechanics of the house, the clock adjusting its breath, the ductwork settling. You can hate that I did it, I said, and still see that it saves the thing you built. She considered that, eyes on the dark window where our reflections goes to the compromise we hadn't made. I see it, she said finally. I also see that every person in those factories will learn a new story tonight, that Brooks can be outmaneuvered by Brooks. We will never uncross that. It was crossed when I was told to wait my turn and discovered there wasn't one. She lifted her glass, then set it down unread. You've won, she said. Don't mistake that for being right about everything. I'll take the chair, for now. I'll keep my hands off the levers you've claimed. But understand me, Daniel, I will not pretend to bless the method. You built something I didn't see coming. Respect. You also made the kind of cut that heals into a different shape. Different is the point, I said. She nodded once, the smallest concession and the largest. Then live with it, she said, and walked past me, leaving the scotch, the window, the line between us glowing faintly like a seam in hot steel that will, with time and pressure, either hold or crack. We met in her office at dawn, the river still the color of unmade decisions. The building woke in increments, security lights clicking off, heat nursing the radiators, a vending machine clearing its throat 2 floors down. She was already there, jacket on, hair set to battle, the blinds half open to make the room look like it had ribs. The desk between us had seen 1,000 contracts survive their signatures. It would survive this. I'll have the truth without choreography, she said. What becomes of my house? Your name stays on the building through transition, I said. 12 months minimum, longer if the market reads the change as steadiness instead of surrender. Employees keep their jobs. Redundancies happen only at the top and only where the org chart lies. You're calling me a redundancy. I'm calling you a story we still need, I said. Chairman Emerita. An office. A calendar with mentoring, client stewardship, 3 monthly touch points with integration. No operating authority. Theater, she said. Architecture, I said. We're load-bearing each other differently. She slid a folder across the desk. My terms? Legacy contract protections for the apprenticeship program. A veto on selling the river plant in the first 2 years. Non-interference cuts both ways. No public correction of my presence when I am ceremonial but useful. Apprenticeship stay, I said. The plant stands unless the river decides otherwise. And you won't speak operationally from the museum chair. She read my face like a ledger. Julia? Enterprise division, I said. Measured by downtime, delivery, working capital. A lane with walls she can see and move if she earns it. She'll push, my mother said. She was raised to. So was steel, I said. It remembers the mold. It doesn't worship it. A thin smile broke and repaired itself. Evan? Separation, repayment schedule under NDA. If he wants back in, he works where numbers aren't adjectives. She looked out at the river, where a tugboat hauled a barge like a thought dragging a conclusion. You'll be loved for the wrong reasons, she said, and hated for the right ones. I know, I said. Both spend, neither pays. She poured coffee into 2 porcelain cups that had survived more than we had. The ritual steadied the table. On Tuesdays your father used to ask me if I was sure, she said, handing me one. I always was. That's how we kept moving. Are you? Yes, I said. Not because it feels good. Because the tolerances insist. We worked line by line, swapping red marks like surgeons comparing scars. Severance for the executives, who had confused tenure with ownership. A promise to speak with one voice in public and to argue in rooms with thick doors. A line about the foundation, enlarged and endowed, to make certain the cut became a graft. When we reached signatures, she held a pen like it was an old weapon that had learned peace. "You'll discover there's nothing ceremonial about being watched," she said. "People read the way you stand." "Then stand with me," I said. She signed her name with the same pressure she used to steady a plant at midnight. I countersigned, and the paper cooled between us. Outside, the river took the light and decided on a color. Inside, we rehearsed a new posture. 2 figures, one with the levers, one with a legend, both holding the weight from different ends so the bridge wouldn't sag. 6 months is enough time for a new rhythm to forget it was ever new. The sign out front reads Brooks, Stone Industries now, a hyphen like a welded seam, ground smooth and painted to match. The river reflects it without commentary. Inside, Atlas sits in a glassed-in room that used to house a filing system no one trusted. Foremen wander in on their breaks and watch the dashboards the way farmers watch weather. Downtime is down 31%. On-time delivery has learned to be literal. Working capital no longer freezes in rows of boxes that look like certainty and spin like fear. We didn't swap out the soul. We tuned it. Sensors on presses and conveyors whisper their numbers into the same ear, and the system makes small decisions before humans need to make large apologies. The midnight shift runs clean now. The old wine in Bay 3 has been tuned out of the room. You can hear a different kind of quiet when you stand on the catwalk above line 3, the hush of a machine that trusts itself. My mother comes in 3 mornings a week, the office with the view arranged like a command post disguised as a museum. Chairman Emerita looks good on her in the way certain uniforms fit better after you stop needing them to make you taller. She mentors new supervisors, signs letters for the foundation, tells a foreman's daughter where to apply for a scholarship, and then remembers to ask if her mother likes the new daycare hours. She does not touch the levers. She does not need to. People still stand straighter when she enters a room. They just look to me when they want permission to start. Julia wears authority like it's finally tailored. Enterprise division is her arena. Legacy lines that learn new tricks without forgetting the old ones. She killed 3 zombie SKUs, revived 2 with a redesign you can measure in fewer returns, and turned an ornery vendor into a partner by giving him a line of sight into our forecasts he'd never had. We tied her bonus to reality, and she ran directly at it. We argue once a week behind a door that knows the sound of siblings who learn numbers in the same house. She does not route around me to our mother anymore. That was part of the deal, and quickly became habit. Evan signed the repayment schedule with a hand that shook and then steadied. He took 6 months away from the spotlight, and showed up last week wearing a badge that says contract coordinator like it's a dare. He sits with procurement and learns what a 3-way match is. He hasn't asked for a camera. He thanks accounts payable when a wire lands. Some afternoons, I catch him staring at the river like it might hand him a different angle. Then he goes back to work. The apprenticeship program doubled. The foundation's first cohort sent 5 women into our maintenance pipeline, and 2 into engineering scholarships. The union president and I meet on Tuesdays to argue about things that matter and to agree, often enough, on the shape of the future. Vendors stop by and leave with fewer promises and more schedules. I still walk the plant at odd hours, listening for the one note that doesn't belong. It's there, it always is. A company is a complicated song, and perfection is just a chorus you hit sometimes. We had the sign painter add a small line under the new name, EST 1979/Rebuilt 2025. It's a truth and a bridge. On good days, when the light hits the steel right and the loading docks exhale on time, I stand with my mother by the window, and we don't say much. She tilts her head toward the hum. I nod. The machine runs, the people learn, the future pays cash. Thanksgiving is next week again. We'll set the table without theater and eat with the doors open, because for the first time in a long time, the house doesn't need proof that it can breathe. We ate at the kitchen table this time. No chandelier additions, no centerpiece engineered for symmetry, just a roast chicken that admitted it was a bird, potatoes the color of honesty, a pie cooling on the sill because the oven had done its part. The river sounded like itself through the open window. The house breathed in a way it hadn't when it was trying to be a stage. My mother brought out plates and didn't correct the placement of a single fork. She poured wine into tumblers, because the stemware was tired and because a glass is a glass. Julia arrived with a salad and a spreadsheet folded in her back pocket that stayed there. Evan came late with rolls he'd actually baked, surprised to discover that flour behaves like numbers if you respect the timing. We took our places without an usher. The chair at the head was just a chair. We went around, not because tradition required it, but because habit can be softened into something true. Evan said he was grateful for boring work that lands when you send it. He didn't perform the line, he wore it. Julia, eyes bright with the kind of fatigue that means you earned your day, thanked the night shift for catching a mispick before it became a recall and, with a glance at me, said she was grateful to be measured by real things. My mother said she was thankful the foundation had funded its first welding cohort, and that steel still remembers the mold that made it, even when the foundry changes hands. Then she looked at me and nodded once, the way you acknowledge a bridge that holds. When it was my turn, I started to say I was grateful for uptime and clean grass, and the way a plant sounds when it trusts itself. What came out instead was smaller and truer. I'm grateful, I said, for the second chances we gave each other, and for the ones we didn't deserve but took anyway. No one made a toast. We just ate while the dog, Evans, borrowed without permission, settled under the table like a promise to stay. After dishes, we walked to the plant. The security guard waved us in with a thermos salute. On the catwalk above line 3, the grating sang the old note, and the machines kept their rhythm. Julia leaned on the rail and pointed out a fix she'd convinced a skeptical foreman to try. My mother called him by name from memory and asked about his daughter's scholarship. Evan pressed his palms to the mesh and listened like he was trying to learn a new language. I thought about the boardroom and the pen that sounded like a gavel, about a bus station that smelled like diesel and choice, about a courier envelope that came back stapled shut. Owning the company had felt like a verdict the day the wire settled. 6 months later, winning looked different. It sounded like a midnight shift that didn't panic, like a supplier getting paid on 10 days, because trust has its own balance sheet, like my mother occupying a chair without levers and discovering it was still a place to stand. On the way home, the river threw back our faces and lost them again. We didn't rehearse apologies or rewrite history. We carried leftovers and a quiet that had weight and good temperature. In the kitchen, my mother put her hand on my shoulder and left it there a beat longer than instruction. I turned off the oven light, and the house exhaled. Tomorrow the line would run and the dashboards would glow and the world would ask us to prove it again. Tonight was proof enough.